Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Give just another minute as people get in. Alrighty, I think, this is such an important topic. There's so much to get through. We're going to go ahead and get started with some of the housekeeping before we start. Just thank you all so much for joining us for our webinar, The Beginner's Guide to Using AI in Your Law Practice. Obviously, this is an increasing area of, software, of support, AI specialties, and technical support. And we're thrilled to have both of our presenters with us for this. This was one of our presentations at the convention this year, but we heard from our evaluations that it was a must-see for all of our members. So we're grateful to Jeff and Phil for joining us. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. If you have any technical questions, technology, anything dealing with any NELA specific questions, you can put those in the chat as well. So I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Chivers, who's the CEO and co-founder of TLA Tech Inc. Jeff founded TLA Tech in 2019 to build Silo, a first of its kind software system for litigation. Before launching Silo, Jeff spent more than 10 years of his career in litigation with Sullivan and Cromwell, the Employment Rights Group, and Chivers LLP. He clerked for the Honorable Pamela K. Chen of the U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of New York and the Honorable Thomas Ambro of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Jeff received his JD magna cum laude and Order of the Coif from Georgetown University Law Center and got a BA in computer science from Harvard. So he's got you covered when it comes to that. Phil is an attorney at Kitzer Rochelle in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he represents employees in claims involving whistleblower, retaliation, discrimination, workers' comp retaliation, FMLA, severance negotiations, and employment contracts. He is a current board member of Minnesota NELA and a past president, and serves on the CLE committee and legislative committee. He's appeared in numerous amicus briefs in front of the Minnesota Supreme Court on behalf of Minnesota NELA and currently serves on the Minnesota State Bar and Labor and Employment Council. Phil has been named a board certified labor and employment law specialist by the Minnesota State Bar Association and is consistently recognized as a rising star and a super lawyer, which I concur with. So gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're excited to talk about this topic. Before we get started, we want to just to emphasize to everybody that this is very much a beginner's guide to using AI in your law practice. We're going to be covering a lot of topics here, and we're going to take a couple of deep dives into a few of the topics. But really, the big takeaway that we want folks to have is how can we start, if you haven't already started using AI in your practice, what are some ways that AI can work for your practice? And how do I get started? And what are some of those tools that are out there for us? We're going to start out today. Jeff's going to give us a background on AI to help us think about what it really is, take a little bit of the mystique away from AI, hopefully. Then we're going to talk about just a few of the products that exist out on the market. It's, there's hundreds. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are just a few products that just as an example of certain things, certain products that do certain things. So we'll talk about those. After we get through that section, we're going to be then talking about the examples, what are the examples, how do we use it for research? How do we use it for discovery? How do we use it for case management and so forth? After that, there'll be just some general considerations we'll discuss on AI use, and then finally talk about some of the ethical considerations that all of us as lawyers should be considering right now. Take it away, Jeff. Tell us about AI.
Right. So I'm kicking off the first section of this, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. The background on AI, we're going to keep it pretty high level and get more quickly into the practical stuff. But we'll start with what is artificial intelligence. And it's a phrase that gets a lot of definitions. If you read anything in the popular news, you may see different definitions. The one that I like is just a machine or software program that can perform tasks that we traditionally associate with human or superhuman intelligence. So not getting too deep into the technical weeds there, it's just a machine or software program that can do things that we traditionally thought only could be done by humans. What is generative artificial intelligence? That's a software program that leverages machine learning to generate text, audio, or video. And it's sometimes referred to as generative AI or Gen AI. And one thing to point out about generative AI versus other technologies, like a Google search, for example. Now, this is a bit complicated by Google putting generative AI into Google search recently. But if you imagine 6 months ago, before they did that, the traditional Google search engine was an interface that you type in the thing you're searching for, and Google pointed you to a primary source document, something that was published on the internet. And other examples like Lexis or Westlaw or other legal research tools in the traditional sense, you type in keywords, you type in natural language, maybe you specify the court or the date that you're looking for, and the software gives you a list of actual primary source authorities that were issued by courts or were written by a person. And generative AI is a different kind of technology, at least when we're talking about the component of generative AI software that generates text or audio or video. It is not a primary source database. It is not a traditional search engine. It is a piece of software or a component of software that is generating new content, is actually generating text. And the way it does that is on the next slide by leveraging machine learning. Again, I'm not going to bore everybody with too much math on a Thursday afternoon, but when I think about machine learning, I just think of it as a math function. You know, when you think about, when you hear the phrase machine learning, I think it's common to wonder, well, what is the machine learning? Because it's different than the way that humans learn. And what a machine learning program is learning is a math function. In the slide that you're seeing there, we have a few basic math functions that you might remember from grade school even. You know, the math function for a line or for a quadratic equation. These have a relatively small number of parameters or variables that go into the math function. And modern machine learning programs are still just math functions, but they are much more complex than what we covered in our grade school or high school math classes. Some examples, predicting the weather. So a lot of weather prediction software uses machine learning to predict the weather, and the input variables there are things like air pressure, humidity, air temperature, solar radiation, and the outputs from the math function are things like the chance of rain in a particular geography in the next 24 hours. And similarly with predicting stock prices, machine learning has been used for decades in predicting stock prices. And the input variables there are things like the federal funds rate and other variables, and the outputs there are predicting stock price at a certain time. So how does this translate into what we're seeing now as lawyers in software programs that are generating text? Because if you're like me, you don't think of text as the generation of numbers in the way that you imagine generation of numbers for predicting the weather or for predicting stock prices. Well, generative AI generates text by predicting the next word based upon statistical likelihood. So something like the sentence on the screen now, skateboarding is an exhilarating blank. The input variables are those words, and the machine understands those words as numbers. You can imagine putting a serial number on every one of those words. Skateboarding is an exhilarating blank. And what the generative AI is doing is calculating based upon that input the most likely next word. And the context of that input shapes the output very much. So if the input has words and sequences of words that point the statistical likelihood in a different direction, like what's on the screen now, the output you're going to get from a generative AI system can be very different because of that input. Now, when we're thinking about this application of pure math to something like generating text in a human-like way, and at this point, I think many people have interacted with generative AI tools, and although we adapt pretty quickly to these things, they are sort of magical. Compared, thinking back 2 years, it was almost 2 years ago that ChatGPT was released into the world, and so I think folks have gotten more acclimated to this, but it is almost magical the way these things can generate such human-like text. And underneath the hood, it is still just a mathematical prediction of the next word, but the complexity of this math equation is astounding. So on the screen here, we're showing again those simple math equations that we may remember from high school. The math equations that underlie the really big generative language models have parameters, and it's fine to think of that as in terms of variables, in the realm of 500 billion or 1.5 trillion variables that are meant to describe how all the words in the English language fit together, and from that, the system predicts the next word, and then the next word, and then the next word. And this mechanism of using math and statistical likelihood to predict the next word is really what's underneath the hood of all of the generative AI software that has been rolling out over the last couple of years. And a fair question is, how far can this simple word prediction be pushed? And on the slide right now is this input variables of plaintiff's brief in support of motion for class certification, defendant's opposition, and a sentence that says, having considered the arguments stated in the plaintiff's brief and the defendant's brief, the motion is blank. And so if you put all of that into a really sophisticated generative AI language model, it's going to predict granted or denied based upon the statistical likelihood of the next word, given all of the words that were in plaintiff's brief and defendant's brief. And to be clear, I don't recommend this as a way for courts to decide anything, and I certainly wouldn't point to it as a reliable way of doing that. But a lawyer in June at the law firm of Jenner and Block, who does a good amount of appellate advocacy, including Supreme Court advocacy, did a test, and he ran basically exactly the test that I just described of putting petitioner's brief and respondent's brief into Claude 3, which is a generative AI software, and asked Claude 3 to predict and explain the outcome of 37 merits cases that were decided last term. And Mr. Unikowski's assessment was that Claude 3 was, first of all, it decided 27 of the 37 cases in the same way the Supreme Court did. And according to Mr. Unikowski, the other 10, he was more persuaded by Claude 3's reasoning than the Supreme Court's reasoning. So it is certainly something that I think all lawyers should pay attention to, and just be aware that this level of sophistication is coming out from the software community, and it is likely to significantly influence how we all think about and how we practice law. With that said, AI is not a sentient being. It is not perfect and infallible. It is not at all a replacement for human judgment or lawyer judgment. And importantly, it is not a database of primary source authorities. With that as background, I'm going to turn it over to Phil to go into the next section.
Well, now that we all understand exactly what AI is and exactly how it works, let's talk about some of the products that are coming out. We want to first talk about a few, just some products to be thinking about, different categories of products that are out there, just so you have something concrete to think about as we're going into sort of how to use the products. The first category that I think of when I think of AI software is what Jeff had already been talking about, is just sort of Gen AI. These are conversational AI. Probably many people here have already started using some of these, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude, Google, Microsoft, they have their own products as well. These can be very, very powerful tools for some basic things that we'll go into throughout this presentation. but there are just some real high level caveats to using these. One of the most important, I think, about using these is generally the information that you're putting into these softwares online. That information is not kept confidential, and you're going to want to check the fine print on that. Most of these, like ChatGPT or Claude, and I think Bard and Bing Chat also have both a free version and a paid version. And Jeff can explain the AI science behind this better than I can, but the way that I understand this is that when you put that stuff in, ChatGPT keeps it and uses it, and it becomes part of the brain of ChatGPT moving forward. Jeff, is that a simplistic way of thinking about it, or accurate enough?
Think of it as a contract question more than anything, and there are some free versions of these conversational Gen AI solutions, and I think there's an adage that's basically like, if it's free, then you're the product. I think that was kind of how people described social media when it first came out, and I think that still is here. So if you're using a generative AI product that is free, that is a pretty good signal that it is not really free, and that the provider of that software is getting something from you. If it's not money, it may be the information that you're putting into it. And my understanding is that all of the vendors that are listed here have a paid version in which they contractually commit to not learn from the content that you put in. And so to me, it really is a question of contract and reading really carefully the terms of service of these solutions.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my understanding of how this works as well. So for example, the free versions, if I put something that has client confidential information in and say, my client Jane Smith worked for blah blah blah, and she had these things happen to her, and talk about the legal theories that I'm presenting, it technically may not be kept confidential. And that's the important thing for the free versions. Now, the paid versions, again, you're going to want to look at those contracts to make sure that the contracts say this is what we'll do with that information, this is what we'll not do with that information. But my understanding is the paid versions are not going to be learning from that information, and therefore it can be treated a little more confidentially. They do have, and I know for that ChatGPT does have a sort of a business plan that you can buy, and that provides some more confidentiality for you. But that is one of the things you're going to want to consider when you're using these products. The other thing that's really important to know about these products is the tendency for them to hallucinate. And if you haven't heard about this yet, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation too. But you can ask ChatGPT or Claude for any particular questions or whatever, and legal research, for example, and they might give you information that's just simply made up. So every time you use, especially any AI product for that matter, but especially these conversational AI products, you're really going to want to check the work, because some of it may be made up. There's a question here. You may be getting this, but I'm wondering if you have a favorite paid product. I mean, personally, I use ChatGPT. I also pay for Claude as well. But for whatever reason, I've just kind of in the habit of using ChatGPT, and I use it for a lot of stuff at work, little stuff at work. But I also use it for things in my personal life, like come up with a recipe, give me a 30-minute workout, translate this into Japanese. There's just 1,000 things you can do. But ChatGPT is the one that I tend to use. The second sort of bucket of products out there that I think of are sort of more the firm management or research products. So Jeff, for example, he and his company, he's the CEO of Silo, and that's one of the first products here. By the way, this isn't an advertisement for Silo, nor is this an endorsement of Silo or any product on these lists here, or criticism of any of these products. We really are just trying to give you a sense of what's out there and what's not. But Silo, for example, is a product that provides services related to discovery and e-discovery, summarizing discovery, summarizing documents, document management, case building, case management, things like that. Another area of software that you're gonna find in this sort of bucket is the legal research. The Westlaw and Lexis, they have both instituted AI products within Westlaw and Lexis that are just using the AI technology to sort of research their own database, so to speak, for legal research. There's another product that is out there called Case Text or Co-Counsel that actually was purchased by Westlaw earlier this year. That product will do some legal research as well. It sort of is supplemented, and actually you access it through Westlaw. It's now an add-on to Westlaw, but it does more than just legal research. It also does some discovery review, document drafting, timeline creation, things like that. And then, another one of the products that was also a sponsor at the National NELA conference was this Consulting by Carrera. And they will draft documents like EEOC charges and blog draftings, FMLA complaints, things like that. And then the third sort of bucket, and some of these overlap a little bit, but the third bucket that I think of is more just like drafting or copy editing or proofreading. And there's a lot of software out there. You're going to see, and you probably have already seen this with your Microsoft and Adobe, they've already integrated AI technology into those softwares. So if you're using paid versions of those, you probably are seeing that they're already there. And they may have some really helpful tools for you to manage documents or look within documents as well. So it's worth looking into those tools you may already have access to. There's a bunch of other software in here. I don't need to go through all of them. Some of them, are real specific, like creating table of authorities. If you draft a long legal brief and then put your document in, it can, just find all the cases in it and create a nice looking table of authorities. Some of them are about you're done with writing something, you want somebody to proofread it, you put your document in and it'll proofread or do copy editing. Some of them will review citations. I haven't. There's some other software out there that will actually draft documents, and this can be very powerful too. I haven't done this in my own practice, but I've talked to other lawyers who have done this. But software that will draft demands for you if you put in a detailed client timeline with a bunch of documents, and maybe some other examples of demand letters that you have written. It can draft a demand for you. It can draft discovery requests. It can draft discovery responses. It can draft complaints, timelines. Again, I haven't gotten into this software personally myself, but I have talked to some other lawyers who have used some of this and have found it to be very powerful software for their practice. So those are some of the products. Let's talk a little bit more about some of these specific uses. And we're going to go through these 5 different categories in the next section of the presentation. We're going to talk about using AI for your legal research, for discovery and document review, for drafting documents, as we were just talking about in a little bit more detail, talk about that in a little more detail, for case building, thinking about how to build your case all together, and then also for contract drafting or contract reviewing. So we talked a little bit about this with legal research, but there's a lot of different functions that in different ways that we do legal research that I have found in my experience using AI. Some of it is helpful, some of it is not so helpful, some of it's quite dangerous. And I want to talk about those. And again, I'm only giving my experience with this. There are just thousands of ways that people can do this. There's no way I can know all of this. All I can do is share my experience with this. But, the first one, of course, is, we're looking for case law. We talked a little bit about using Westlaw, using Lexis, those kind of resources for doing case law research. And some of that can be actually quite helpful. I find that sort of on more my experience, again, on sort of a broader level, like doing research for case law can be really quick, and you can get some nice memos like real fast on like, here's a bunch of cases on this particular topic. Where I have personally found that AI hasn't really caught up to where I might expect it to be in this area is really finding that needle in a haystack. And sometimes that's where our longest and most difficult research projects are. There's a very specific legal question, maybe in a specific jurisdiction, and you're not quite sure how courts have interpreted this versus that. And you're really trying to find that one case that might be out there. I personally have not found the AI search functions in the big research software programs to be that great at finding that stuff. And in fact, I still am just using the old school Boolean searches on those kind of things. That said, I think that there is a lot of use for doing case law research in those software programs. Going to emphasize again, be real careful in using ChatGPT, whatever, for case law research. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in the presentation. Another way that I have found sort of a different subcategory of legal research that I found AI to be very helpful in is to summarize statutes or regulations. Sometimes you find yourself having to look at, a regulation that's quite complicated, whether it's, like a banking regulation or a EPA regulation, and it's just like kind of overwhelming. This is a really great way of using some of these AI tools to give me a summary of what this is. Tell me where the language for whether or not there's a private cause of action or what the remedies are for this kind of thing. And what it can do is get you to that point much quicker than just slogging through the whole regulation or the whole statute by yourself. And again, like all of this, I always ask whenever I'm using any of these AI tools, I ask it, like, give me the citation, and then I will actually go there myself and just make sure and read that section itself. And then you can even follow up with questions on, are there other ways, that the statute addresses, cause of action or whatever, whatever it is that you're looking at. So, but I think that that's a really great tool. We also do, a lot of whistleblower cases in Minnesota, and I think that, a lot of folks, across the country have whistleblower cases. And one of the interesting, what I find challenging about whistleblower cases is, when your client makes a report of something illegal, you have to, that client has to be right that actually is a violation of the law. At least that's how it works in Minnesota. I know in a lot of other states. So that leads you to having to, you've got somebody who's, in the healthcare industry and is making a report on HIPAA or whatever. You end up like having to go and do a lot of deep research in areas that we're not normally practicing in. It's a really great way to just say, this seems illegal. I don't know why it is. Boom. You can usually have AI help you find that statute or that regulation that you're going to rely on to say, this is what I'm going to point to show that this is what they were reporting to. In Minnesota, and I think a lot of states say this, an employee doesn't have to actually cite the regulation itself or the law itself. It just has to be that the thing that they're complaining about is a violation of the law. So again, very, very helpful here. Some of the more advanced things that you can do, you can actually use and some folks will do this, use AI to generate some legal arguments. And this is where you're starting to get AI to sort of think with you and use it as a partner for, like, what other causes of actions might be here that I'm missing. AI, again, as long as you're using AI as a partner, a tool, and not substituting, for your own thinking, can help you come up with some thoughts, that maybe you otherwise hadn't considered before for a particular case. Jeff also had mentioned, looking at predicting case outcomes, and or at least like analyzing those Supreme Court cases he talked about in the earlier slide. This is a powerful thing you can do. You can use AI to evaluate the case strength that you have, or how strong is my promissory estoppel claim here, based on these elements. And that can really help supplement the legal research side of your practice here.
And I think I'll just add an opinion if I could, because I do speak to a lot of junior lawyers about this, who often are the ones doing legal research, or even law students. And my current view on this is very much, you still need to read the cases. And
yeah.
I keep saying that in every setting that I'm in, you still need to read the cases. And there's a question actually that just came in. It says that the writer says that they heard there was a study by Stanford about Westlaw and other companies' products in the legal research realm hallucinating, giving inaccurate information in response to questions about legal research. And the question is, have those problems been solved? I don't know the exact answer to that. There was a study published by Stanford that identified a significant rate of incorrect answers out of those tools. And there was some counterpoints made by those companies. And I think I have seen some commentary and some reports suggesting that there is still a significant risk of inaccuracy with those tools. And that is something that, as a technologist, I don't expect to change very soon. I think just the nature of generative AI technology creates that risk. And it's going to, I think, continue to improve, but it should not be viewed as an easy button. And especially in the realm of legal research, my consistent message is you still have to read the cases. And even if you're using generative AI to write up a legal summary or a legal memorandum that summarizes an area of law, I would strongly recommend you not take that as the truth, but rather you take that as a possible answer that might be true and might point you in the right direction, but that reading the cases remains essential.
Yeah, I would agree
or
with
the
that.
statutes or the regulations.
Yep. I agree with that 100%. And I don't think that can be overemphasized here in this presentation, no matter what we're doing. I sometimes think of these AI tools as having a law clerk who is very fast, but makes a lot of mistakes. So you have the memo right on your desk way faster than you otherwise would, but expect that there's going to be some mistakes in there. So even though, maybe they provide you with 6 cases, you got to go look at those 6 cases. And I mean, look, we have to do that anyway. Anytime you submit something to the court, it has to be, you have to shepherdize it. You have to make sure that this is good case law. So I think that this is pretty common practice for, most lawyers. I know there are NELA lawyers, are lawyers who care very much about their lawyering practice. I think that this probably isn't a shock that, that you got to read the cases and you got to read the statutes themselves. But it can, I think, it's it might become easy to fall into some sloppy habits that you want to make sure you don't. And we're going to talk about this too a little bit later. It's also very important that for newer associates, and as Jeff mentioned, new folks coming right out of law school who might have not maybe, you want to make sure that you're developing those habits right away too. So Jeff, tell us about discovery and document review.
Another area where generative AI solutions can be very useful in litigation is around discovery and document review. Summarizing large sets of documents. And what do we mean large sets of documents? Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and more. The size of data sets that would take lawyers hours or days or weeks to fully get through. There are solutions that can dramatically streamline that process. Coding documents for responsiveness. This occurs a lot more on the defense side than it does on the plaintiff side, but it happens on the plaintiff side too, as I'm sure folks in the audience know. That's where the lawyer's task is to review a whole bunch of documents and determine which of them are responsive and need to be produced to the other side. An example of that, and I spend almost every day now just working with lawyers and applying generative AI to various cases. The one law firm got ordered by a court to label 9,000 documents for every document, which RFP or ROG does this document respond to? And I think there's a local rule in California that's roughly along those lines. And so applying 30 different labels to 9,000 documents is a terribly tedious task that generative AI solutions are extremely effective at. The suggesting of privilege or potential privilege, the prediction or suggestion of redactions on, for example, PHI or PII, personally identifiable information or personal health information. Often when firms need to produce documents in discovery, they first need to redact those documents. Generative AI is quite effective at suggesting those redactions, which can just speed things up. Lawyers and paralegals still need to review it, but accelerating that process is another good example. Generating timelines and summaries of e-discovery documents as well.
Yeah, if I can just jump in and just say like that, actually, that's something that I have found to be really powerful with some of these AI softwares, the timelines of the e-discovery documents. If you have, a stack of emails of 1,000 emails or something, and you really want to, create a timeline of the reports of discrimination and anything related to the investigation. Some of these software products can do that for you fairly quickly, and it can be quite powerful. Again, emphasizing again, you have to review the documents themselves and make sure that they fit into the timeline that's created for you. Things could get missed, important things that could get missed, that you could get burned at a deposition or trial on. But it's a really powerful thing to really to get things started.
I think the other area that I've seen a huge amount of value in the discovery realm is just finding documents. And I don't think this is something that people naturally think about when they think about generative AI, because the word generative suggests that the primary use is to generate things. But what we've learned over the last couple of years is that the same capability that generative AI brings is actually quite useful for finding things as well. And in the discovery realm, that comes up a lot in things like document dumps. 2 days before a deposition, party produces 10,000, 20,000 documents, the proverbial document dump. There are generative AI solutions that are extremely effective at getting through that volume of documents very quickly to find the small number of documents that might be useful for a deposition, for example.
Jeff, we have a question about that. The question is, the paper documents, if people still get these, must all be scanned in and online before you can use AI, correct? And the answer to that is, yeah, they all need to be scanned in. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, sometimes you get handwritten documents and they have to be converted to OCR, maybe just at a high level, like how some of these softwares handle different types of documents.
We deal with this a lot, and the answer is yes. So if literally the documents are produced in paper form in a box, for example, they need to be scanned in. OCR is optical character recognition. It's an old form of a vision AI. We don't think of OCR as an artificial intelligence, I don't think, but it is a vision-based way of extracting the text from scanned documents, and that is still used. What generative AI brings to the table is kind of a super-powered OCR. I've seen a lot of situations where document quality is low. It's a scan from 30 years ago, and traditional OCR does a decent job, but not good enough. Generative AI vision models might be a way to get the extracted text that you need. And once the extracted text is obtained from a scanned-in document, you can apply the normal AI searching, normal keyword searching as well to that document. When it comes to handwriting, there are vision models that do a pretty good job at identifying handwriting. However, it's kind of like when humans look at handwriting. We struggle to we struggle to interpret handwriting that is very poorly written or illegible. And so that's an area where I wouldn't recommend generative AI as a complete solution for reviewing handwritten documents. It may be a way to identify which documents among a large population of documents have handwriting on them. And it may be useful in some situations to extract information that is written in handwriting, but that's an area where the models struggle to understand handwriting, kind of the same way we struggle to understand other people's handwriting.
Quick question from one of the attendees here. Are you using Gen AI products like Claude, Bard, et cetera, for the discovery of for discovery document review we've been discussing, or more specialized products like Silo, et cetera? Seems like the data volume limit on Claude that may make use in discovery document review is problematic. Our firm practice is we have not been using Claude, ChatGPT, those kind of softwares for this kind of discovery. We have been using other, other products that are more sophisticated. I think that you're just going to find so much more technology available for analyzing those documents through the softwares that are built to do that. And the second issue, always comes back to me to the confidentiality of the information. Even though we use like a paid version of ChatGPT, I don't know, I just feel a little bit nervous. Like I'm just not really sure what's happening there. I feel a little bit safer using some of these other softwares that we have.
And without mentioning any specific product, I feel pretty comfortable saying that, at least right now, using a legal technology that is built for discovery is what I am seeing firms do. And I am not seeing law firms use the general conversational AI solutions for large-scale discovery work. There's a handful of products that are out there that are specific to discovery, and they have features related to e-discovery, and they also have generative AI features that are built into that discovery platform. And that's very much what I'm seeing in working with many law firms around this. And the question from John is one that I think comes up a lot. And the way that I've seen law firms answer that over the last year or so is that when it comes to discovery in litigation, they're using a discovery tool that has generative AI features in it and not relying on a conversational AI for that. Phil, did you want to go into the next section on work product?
Are we done? Are we done with I think you had the slide here on discovery document review. Or are we done with that?
I can touch on that briefly. I think that in addition, in the discovery realm, is answering natural language questions about documents, summarizing documents such as medical records, translating documents from foreign languages. One comment about that is that from everything I've seen and the reports I've seen about the performance of generative AI models on foreign language translation, it is not at the level of a certified translation. So I very much see it being used by law firms as a way to get a quick and rough translation of a document. But if they are planning, for example, to rely on that document that's in a foreign language, they're not going to use, I haven't seen law firms use the generative AI translation as a truly authoritative translation of it. And summarizing depositions, generating deposition digests, for example, is another use case in discovery that I see quite often.
So the next bucket of in an area where you can use AI in your practice is drafting, using AI to start drafting certain documents. And I've talked to some lawyers who have found this to be very, very powerful. And there's different ways that you can do this. I know lawyers, and again, I haven't done this myself in my practice, but some lawyers who will have this software that'll draft their pleadings, draft discovery responses, draft correspondences. And I don't want to repeat what I already said, but that's a very powerful, potentially powerful way to use this. You can also just use it to edit rough drafts. So if you draft something and you want some feedback on if this is worded well, you can. One area that I haven't used this a ton for my own writing, but one area I sometimes have done it with that I find like, hey, this actually works pretty well. It's like if I draft an email that sounds like maybe the tone isn't exactly how I want it to come across because maybe I'm angry or something and I want it to come across a little friendlier. I will draft that and then just say this in a friendlier way. And then I'll get a draft back that rephrases it in a much friendlier way. And then I can use some of the language from that to tone it down a little bit, or if you ever like stuck on a concept and you really just can't figure out how to get this concept out into a paragraph, or there's a sentence you're just not getting right, this is something that you can use with ChatGPT. Give me 10 different ways to say this sentence, and then and then you can say, I really like that. That's kind of what I'm looking for here. So some powerful stuff if you're finding yourself kind of stuck in your writing process. Some folks use it for proofreading, final drafts, checking for typos, things like that. I haven't had much success. I've tried that on a couple of softwares, and I just haven't had a ton of success with that. Maybe there's software out there that does that well, but I just haven't come across it personally. Um, I've talked to folks who've used AI to create templates for or forms, for their office, and that can be quite powerful too. If you want a template for like an intake form that your staff can use or that you want to use whenever you have a new client, potential client, that's another thing that AI can put together in a second for you. And then other folks have used it for like drafting briefs, like look at, uploading information, your depositions, your documents, like your case file, and say draft a fact section here. I haven't got to that. I don't know where that is, and as far as how developed that technology is or how useful that technology is. I also find that I love doing that's one of my favorite parts of lawyering, so I don't want to give that away to AI. But if you hate it, you might find that that's a useful tool.
I'm going to be pretty quick on case building because it does emanate out of the discovery process, which I think I've already said plenty about. In the realm of case building, that's where you're at the stage of having collected a lot of documents or received a lot of documents and perhaps even reviewed them, and you're getting down to the brass tacks of selecting documents for depositions or building out a deposition outline. That's where generative AI can be helpful around finding documents, summarizing documents. There's tools out there that are using generative AI to collect information about people and offering up solutions that are basically search databases, but the search databases are improving because generative AI is being used to collect and aggregate that information. Putting documents into chronological order or building chronologies out of a set of documents. Many of these I covered before, Phil, so I think we can head on to contract review.
Sure. Yeah, and then another bucket of another area where this might be useful in your practice is either contract drafting or contract review. You can use AI to create a first draft of a contract. You can use AI to rephrase, language in a contract that that's in there and you just don't like how it's phrased. You can, if you have a sort of like maybe, at the end of a mediation, there's a complicated term and you're not quite sure how to put it into language that should go into a contract, but both parties are kind of on the same page about what it means. These AI tools can be really helpful to just put that concept in as best you can into the AI tool and then say draft something for a contract 5 different ways and then see what it comes up with. And you can usually come up with some kind of language that you and opposing counsel can be satisfied with to memorialize the concept that you're looking at. So that can be very powerful and a quick way to deal with some of those issues. Some folks are using as more advanced level is using AI to assess the risk level of a contract. Some software that you'd be able to put the contract in and ask it, or what are the risks that of being sued for, or what's a risk of violating this NDA, or if there's a violation of this NDA, what's is this going to be enforceable in the court of law, something like that. So sometimes you can get a little bit more substantive analysis back from some of these software programs on the strengths or weaknesses of your particular contract. Or I've also got examples here about contract language that might be specific to a certain jurisdiction. And obviously you have to be careful about practicing law in a jurisdiction that you're not in. But if you want to find out, is a non-compete agreement enforceable in Minnesota? It's not after this year, at least new non-competes. That's something that you can easily find out through some of these AI programs.
So we've just over the last 20 or 30 minutes gone through a pretty dizzying number of ways that generative AI can be used in litigation. And I think it is overwhelming, even though I spend all my time on basically this subject. It is still somewhat overwhelming to see the number of ways that generative AI could potentially be used in litigation. And the way I try to make sense out of this and think about using these generative AI solutions responsibly is by thinking about what is the thinking, what is the thinking that I am offloading when I use a generative AI solution? And so what is the cognitive function that I'm offloading when I use this solution? Am I having it summarize something, draft something, find something, analyze something, explain something, extract something, classify something, brainstorm something? These are ways of thinking about software that I don't think comes naturally to us. We've used calculators for many, many years. We're all comfortable that we can type in numbers and have our computers do math for us, including complicated math, but we're not that familiar yet with offloading these types of thinking processes to computers. And so when I'm thinking about reliance and safely using these things, I'm thinking about what am I offloading to the software? And then I'm thinking about how am I using the outputs of that software? And on the slide, we give a list of 5 ways. These are, I think, the 5 ways that lawyers could rely on the output of a generative AI solution. Whatever that solution is and whatever workflow you're using it in, I think this is potentially useful. So one thing you could do is just rely on the output without validating it at all. And we put the word no exclamation point on the slide because that's probably not the right way to rely on a generative AI output in almost any context. Then you validate every single output. You validate every single word and sentence and citation, and you check the source. You validate every single piece of the output. You might validate the outputs statistically. This comes up most in discovery in large document cases, where you can't validate every single output by the generative AI with respect to that many documents, and so you do so statistically. You might consult the generative AI output before you do your own work on something. You use it as a jumping off point or as a starting draft. Or you might consult the generative AI output after you've done your work as a cross-check or to identify omissions and blind spots. And just to maybe make this more concrete, I was going to ask Phil, Phil, are there any Gen AI use cases where you would rely on the output without review and validation?
I'm going to say that in red, no. The answer is no. And go ahead.
How about some examples where you might use Gen AI outputs and validate every single piece of that output?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like we've been kind of talking about, especially with legal research, if you're using Gen AI, whether that was a really good question earlier about, even using the AI functions within Westlaw and Lexis, you still need to go look at those cases and ensure that they're actually saying what the AI is summarizing says. So that's an example where I just think anything you're submitting to the court, you had better be prepared that if some clerk decides to dig into this and and ask you questions about it, that this is gonna say exactly what you're saying that it says. So.
And you described earlier how you've used Gen AI solutions for legal research. Do you think of that as something that you consult before you do your own research, or something that you consult after, or both?
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit of both. As long as I'm not relying on it exclusively. I think, like I said earlier, you can use Gen AI to just sort of like launch into a research project. Like, how do I find this particular statute that says something like this? And then that can take you to the part of the regs or the part of the statutes, whatever that you're trying to look for, something complicated, and then you go look and make sure it says what it says, and then look at the cases that are associated with that particular statute to ensure you understand how that has been interpreted before. So again, I think that this is stuff that lawyers would normally do anyway. Most lawyers, hopefully, but you just can't forget to do that because this just seems so quick and instantaneous that you just can't forget to do that. We have a couple of questions here. I want to quickly address those, and then I want to talk about a few ethical issues as well. So somebody had asked, is there any numbers or examples on what these resources cost? Great question. There's a wide range of these things. I mean, I think I could be wrong about this, but I think our ChatGPT like paid version is like $20 a user or something like that. I mean, it's pretty manageable. Um, I've seen some software that's $4,000 or $5,000 a month for more advanced software. I maybe there's other stuff that's more, there's other stuff that's less. I think that there's a wide range of costs on these things, and and different software programs have different payment models. Some is just like a flat fee, you buy it once and that's it. Some of it's a monthly fee. And I think that these things are probably going to be changing as these software companies are trying to figure out like what their own costs are. I mean, remember, just about every one of these companies is fairly new in this space because the whole space is brand new. So this stuff is going to be changing pretty quickly. But Jeff, anything to add to that, or?
No, I agree that it does range quite widely. It does.
Someone asked, can documents be provided to ChatGPT to summarize, or does it just summarize articles or documents from the internet? Great question. No, you can upload a PDF to ChatGPT and say, analyze this. I've tried that before, and sometimes it's useful. Like, for example, like some decision comes down that's 90 pages long, and you just kind of want a nice summary of what happened there. You can upload that and try to get a summary. I will say though that it hasn't always been 100% accurate when I've done it. Maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I'd be careful about that. Somebody else says, I'd assume you could use this for firm management, creating budgets, etc. Yeah, definitely. That's like a whole there's a whole world of like business, the AI use in like managing any kind of business, whether it's a law firm or a bakery or whatever. So yeah, lots of resources out there for that. So we've got a few more minutes. Let me just take it 30 seconds to talk about this. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. I know that what do I do? I'm a small firm, trying to juggle being a lawyer, but also managing a firm. How do I have time to figure out like what AI products to use? How much do I want to spend? And there's no easy answers to these things. I just try to think about, what are your needs? Are you a firm that just does tons of EEOC complaints? I'd look for something like that. Are you a firm that really is heavy into litigation? I look at some of this litigation software. I talked to a firm that, is spending $4,000 or $5,000 a month on some of the software, but they're a larger firm, and they said it's a lot cheaper than an associate, and we're getting the work from it. I also try to think when I'm looking at these products. I mean, obviously you want to think about the cost and what you can afford, the security, confidentiality, whether or not there's signs that this company is going to take those things seriously. And then also kind of look for like, are there things that make it seem like this is a reliable company? Like I'm going to invest a lot of time and money and energy into, this particular software. Is it going to be around in 6 months? Is it going to be around in a year? Like what are they doing to sort of like talk to me, as, and ensure that they're committed to us, going forward. So those are some things that I think about. I don't know if that's helpful or not. Let's talk briefly about some ethical considerations. I told you earlier that there were people, there have been lawyers that have been sanctioned by just using ChatGPT to try to find a case that says X, Y, and Z, finds the case. ChatGPT says, here are 4 cases for your position. They submit that to the court. The court's clerk goes to look up the cases. Cases don't exist, and the guy goes to the lawyer goes to the hearing and is asked about this and doesn't have a good answer because ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it was that they used hallucinated, and they didn't go and check that work, and those lawyers have gotten sanctioned. I wanted to give you guys some examples of lawyers or cases where that's happened. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, give me some cases where that's happened, and this is what it came up with. These are 5 different cases of lawyers who were sanctioned for the use of AI in their legal briefing. So I did what I've been telling all of you to do. I went and site checked all these cases, and 2 of them were true, 2 of them were hallucinations, and 1 of them was unverified. So I use this as an example of showing that, yes, these two examples of people who've gotten in trouble over this kind of thing. But this is also an example of how, this stuff hallucinates and it can get you in a lot of trouble. So you really want to be careful on that. I want to show you, our firm happens to use FindLaw, and there's other products out there. I understand that. I went to FindLaw or Westlaw, and did the exact same query, and these 4 cases came up. I went and looked at them all, and they all do address, to one way or the other, AI, lawyers who got in trouble for using AI. Again, I didn't look at the details exactly what happened in those cases, but the point being, like, you still want to check even with the Westlaw research and look at the cases themselves. But people are getting in trouble for this. You want to be really careful. There are some ethical considerations, that I want to take just a couple minutes at the end. We're almost out of time here, but I think these are really important as we just remember, these are big changes. I mean, it just is. Our society is, we've lived through big changes before. The invention of the internet, cell phones, social media, like they're huge, fundamental changes, and this is the next one. And as these things happen, we really have to kind of come back to our obligations as lawyers and making sure, like, are we doing this right? And in some ways, there's a little bit of a push-pull. In some way, you want to make sure that if you're using this technology, that you're using it right, so you're not, violating any potential rules, of your ethical obligations. On the other hand, you can't even, you also may be violating the rules if you're ignoring some of this stuff, because as the entire practice of law is changing, it raises the question of, if you're not keeping up with it, are you actually, fulfilling your duty for competency under Rule 1.1? Are you doing your fulfilling your obligation for diligence or promptness under Rule 1.3? Those are important aspects as well. On the one hand, if you're relying on ChatGPT for your cases, you're not doing your due diligence, or you're not being diligent on your research if you're submitting that to a court. On the other hand, if you're working on something that used to take 20 hours, to put something together, and now with technology, it only takes 2 hours, then perhaps you're not being prompt anymore. And I'm not saying that we're necessarily at that point yet, as far as like the expectation of how fast things should go, like how much technology we should be using in our practice. But I could see within 5 years that those things, a lot of change. The same with reasonable fees. If something used to cost, $5,000 in time to do for a client, can now be done in 30 minutes. And if you're just doing it manually and charging $5,000, is that a reasonable fee? We talked about confidentiality, Rule 1.6, very important, to make sure that you're using these tools in a way that's keeping your client's confidential information confidential. And then I just want to also mention Rule 5.4, 5.1 to 5.3, supervision. If you've got younger folks, or I should say newer folks who are, practicing or using AI, you really want to keep a close eye on them to make sure that they're not over relying on this, that they're, double checking the work that they're engaging in. So. Last slide. We're gonna share this PowerPoint with folks, but these are links to some guidance that has been issued. The ABA issued a formal opinion in July on using generative AI tools, and then there's been a few. These aren't all of them, but these are 3 different state bar associations that have also issued reports and recommendations on using AI in your legal practice. It's really a great place to just kind of look at and make sure that you're thinking about all these different things as you're diving into this. Last question, for a solo practitioner who's never used AI, what would you recommend as a first baby step? I think I would, just a very first baby step, I'd just spend some time on ChatGPT or Claude or one of those, and just kind of get a flavor for how it works, keeping these principles in mind about the importance of confidentiality and all the other things we talked about today. But just kind of like what do you use AI for? I mean, there's 1,000 things you can use it for. And once you start kind of building on those baby steps, then you start thinking about, oh, okay, I can see this, using how this technology might be used in my practice this way. And then I'd encourage you, be careful of the Gen AI stuff, but see if there's programs or software programs out there that, can do that in a little bit more of a meaningful way for your practice, and then research those software programs, figure out the cost, and then go from there. So I hope that's helpful. Jeff, anything else?
I actually very much agree with that. I think if you have not used ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or something like that, I strongly recommend that you try it out and play with it. Even if it's the free version and all you put into it is non-confidential information, I think the firsthand experience of interacting with those conversational Gen AI is definitely the first baby step. If you haven't taken that one yet, then I would say definitely at least take that one and go from there.
Jeff and Phil, thank you so much for reprising this from the convention. I think this is incredible information. For those of you who are attending, we'll be sending out a copy of this PowerPoint along with some other materials in the coming days. And for those of you who were registered or had people registered that weren't able to make it, we'll also be putting a recording up so everyone can get this valuable information. Once again, Phil, Jeff, thank you so much. For NELA, thank you all so much. Be on the lookout for dates for our committee and practice group meetings in December. And of course, our Wage and Hours seminar in March.
Thanks for having us, Ashley.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, everybody.